earlier, I'd expected her disapproval of Edward's affections toward me to comfort the portion of myself that regretted leaving him there in the hallway crying. It was admittedly the only reason I'd allowed her to enter in the first place. Clearly, I had been shocked when she'd offended him. "He's been through so much already, Bella," she'd uttered with a certain glint of distinguishable pity in her gaze. I was beyond incredulous and frustrated, but once she had sat down and began relaying what Carlyle had already told her, it all became very clear. Much in the same way a mother pig adopts a litter of neglected puppies, Esme felt drawn to Edward's abandonment and his mother's poor treatment of him. It all made perfect sense. Any mother who had half a heart would be sorrowed by Edward's story. It made her maternal nature blaze because he was Carlyle's son, and she was, in many ways, his other half. She was falling into her role with enthusiasm, ready to protect him from those who would cause him harm, because Esme was simply Esme. It was the sweetest, most annoying thing ever. I'd spent hours contemplating everything Edward had endured while in Chicago. His mother being an intolerable child, and the obligation he'd felt to care for her, as if she were one. Honestly, I didn't understand her logic one bit. I still hated her with every cell of my being. I felt no pity for that woman. A true mother wouldn't have let anything deter her from caring for her child. Esme knew what Elizabeth didn't: your children come first before everything else, grief included. Edward was torn between two obligations. That, I could understand. I could understand him choosing his mother over everything else. What I couldn't understand was why he closed himself off. Even worse, I couldn't understand why he'd even decided to return. I steeled my nerves as I finally turned to him, eager to have my curiosity quenched. He was still sitting atop the wooden table with his feet on the bench. His gaze was fixed on his hands, which floated, clasped between his parted knees. His hair was so much longer, hiding his eyes from me. "You'll go back?" I stated with confidence. His eyes finally rose to meet mine, dark and green and confused. I elaborated, "You know she's out there, and she needs you? You'll go back to her again?" I couldn't restrain the tremble of my voice. I'd been thinking about it for hours now, and my mind always came to the same conclusion: he would leave again. He shook his head in objection, but I shook mine right back. My voice was still trembling with emotion. "You act like you're the only one who's ever lost your mother," I charged and swallowed while trying to keep my gaze on his, but it was difficult. My vision grew watery with tears that wouldn't be suppressed, and I blinked them away, sending dripping trails falling hurriedly down my cold cheeks. I hugged myself tighter as he visibly struggled to appreciate the meaning of my words, tilting his head and narrowing his eyes in concentration. His sharp intake of air and my erratic breathing was all that could be heard for a long moment. I used this time to attempt to rein in my emotions, but it was futile. I'd been holding them back, even for Carmen, and now they wouldn't be contained. My jaw trembled as I finally diverted my gaze away from his grief-stricken stare. I knew then that he understood what I'd meant.
"You choose her over me?"
he stated in a soft voice that elicited an abrupt, unintentional sob from my chest. I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. My love for Edward was endless and infinite, and yet for one moment, with my mother, I'd willingly throw it all away. It was unforgivable. I couldn't remember my last words to her, or the way her hair smelled, and I would have given anything to have it all back. If I could have turned back the hands of time and been that carefree 14-year-old whose mother was her best friend, I would have. Really, I'd throw everything away: Alice, Esme, Carlyle, Forks, everything. I couldn't reconcile the two conflicting conclusions: that it made me both a fallible human being and a complete monster. Guilt wasn't a strong enough word for what it made me feel. They all deserved so much more. For the better part of the day, I'd felt above Edward for being rational and in a healthier state of mind. But now it was obvious that Edward had surpassed me in his own resurgence. He was willing to finally let go of his past and move on, while I had this dormant truth lying beneath the surface that told me I'd never stop clutching at what was gone. I was exhausted from the day and the week, and the last 5 months, and 2 years. I collapsed against the wooden beam I'd been leaning against and hugged my knees tightly to my chest. I turned my face away from Edward as I cried because I didn't want him to see this weakness in me. It robbed me of the upper hand that I'd thrived on for most of the evening. Through the sounds of my own muffled sobs and grinding teeth, I couldn't hear him jump down from the table and approach, but I could feel it. I didn't really care. My weak submission to his white noise seemed inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. I could feel him stop short of touching me, and it was infuriating to know that my earlier behavior was depriving me of what I obviously wanted. His voice was genuine and guarded as he spoke.
It's okay.
He comforted me, and I shook my head against my knees ferociously. I'm an awful person, I choked because I wanted him to disagree, and I had no idea if he would. There was a moment of charged silence in which I could almost sense the warring conflict in his mind. I could also sense when he finally decided to chance it, and moved close enough to reach out to me. I didn't fight him off as his arms surrounded me from my side, sending his soothing current flowing over my flesh. My sob transformed into a sigh as I raised my head and unfolded my knees, eager for whatever comfort he'd give me. I leaned into him, feeling his relief at my acceptance as he sat, pulling me into his lap, and holding me tightly as the darkness and his hair obscured his features. The smell of his neck and the sensations of his hands rubbing my back were completely euphoric, but I couldn't smile.
It's okay,
he repeated, this time into my hair. I could feel him taking a long inhale and pushing his nose deeper. His arms around me tightened, crushing my shoulder into his chest in a way that must have been painful.
If it was possible and I could do it, I'd want you to choose her anyways,
he said in an earnest voice into my hair. That drew another guilty sob from my chest, because I couldn't be so sacrificing with him. His arms tightened further around me and I pivoted my chest, so that my shoulder wouldn't be digging into his sternum. Surrendering. I breathed him in greedily to subdue my sobs and erratic breathing. His firm embrace and constant nuzzling of my hair eased my guilt minutely because I knew I still wielded some power over his happiness. It didn't absolve him, and it didn't make me willing to forgive his every error, but it eased my confusion, albeit a little unfairly. When my sobs finally ceased and I was able to turn my face to the river, resting my cheek on his chest, I felt peaceful. The slosh of the river and the feeling of his hands, face, and body against me were unequivocally serene. In any other moment, it would have been utter perfection. Instead I had all of these questions and confusing anomalies that eventually penetrated my tranquility. Without meeting his gaze, I pressed myself closer to him and asked, "Why didn't you call me, or keep writing, or something? Anything?" His arms tightened, impossibly more unyielding.
I was so fucking weak, Bella.
He sighed against my scalp, warm and shuddering.
I'm not sure I should justify it,
he muttered, but continued, before I could protest.
There were probably a million reasons. I didn't want to burden you and I didn't want to be tempted by something easier. Also, you're my oil.
He shrugged, as if that were something that made sense. Confused, I furrowed my brow, but he quickly added,
Never mind. It's really fucking stupid.
It is. I agreed in a curt voice, unable to comprehend his justification, and still unwilling to pretend I did. He inhaled, as if he were going to speak, but quickly released it, and remained silent, as he held me. My disagreement hadn't tainted the peacefulness of the moment, and my eyes felt heavy. After many moments, he sighed into my hair, long and seemingly defeated.
I know it doesn't mean much, but you're wrong about me leaving again. I won't,
he promised.
I'm going to make this work, you'll see. Even if you hate me now.
He breathed. My hair and the softness of his declaration made his final words difficult to hear, but not impossible. I rolled my eyes and pressed myself closer. I don't hate you. I love you, you melodramatic asshole. I disliked the necessity of denying any amount of ill will, so I kept that fact to myself.
Really?
He asked, uncertain but hopeful. My frustration flared, and in a moment of unrestrained emotion, I couldn't bear him not knowing just how much pain he'd caused me.